Interview of Mr. Martin Sylvester at the 69th Armory, 9 January 2001. Interviewer is Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hassel. Videographer is Mr. Michael Akey. Martin, tell me about where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in Brooklyn and grew up in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Lived in Brooklyn until I was about 25, 26 years old. Then I got married and we moved to Manhattan. So I've lived in New York City all of my life, except for 2 years that I went to graduate school in Tallahassee, Florida, Florida State University. So other than that, I've been in New York and I'm a New Yorker.
What were you doing before you entered the Army?
Immediately before I was in Brooklyn College. So I had just started, I had just turned, well, I was almost 18 when I graduated high school. I was about 17. Spent 1 semester at Brooklyn College, and then I turned 18, and 2 months later I was drafted.
So where did you go for your induction physical, and take us forward from there?
Yeah. You know, I don't recall too much of that. I know went through the induction, through the physical, and I remember, I think it was in Fort Dix where I started it all, and then I was for a short time in what they call the Army Specialized Training Program, the ASTP. I had taken the intelligence test, and I guess I qualified for that, and that was a short stay. I think it was 2 or 3 months, and then they ended the program, and we went into the infantry, and I went into basic training, and that was, I'm not sure, it was in Alabama. I think it was Fort McClellan, I'm not sure. But it was infantry basic, went through infantry training, and after, I think it was 8 or 12 weeks, and then we were shipped to England. And I came in as a replacement in England, and it was in England that I joined the 4th Infantry Division. And from there, I know the 4th Infantry landed on Utah Beach on D-Day, but I don't think I was with them on D-Day. I think I went in later, but I know from England, we boarded the LSDs and we did land on the beach. They took us in to France, and we waded through the surf to get to the beach, and we walked up, I remember, a path going alongside the bunkers, and then we went in through France. So that's not too clear to me. I know we fought in France. I remember hedgerows. I remember, the thing I remember most was dead animals, I mean bloated and lying in the fields. And I did see dead Germans, and the Americans, they seemed to evacuate pretty fast. The Germans stayed there a little longer. But the thing that I remember most was Hurtgen Forest. When we got to Hurtgen Forest, I mean, I think I was in my company maybe a few months, and within a short time, I was, I think, the 7th senior person in the company. Everybody else was killed. I remember the mortars, and I remember the 88s, and I remember the shrapnel. I remember being in a shrapnel barrage where there were tree bursts and coming down on us. And I remember that I was trying to claw myself into the ground, couldn't get in there fast enough, and I remember pieces of shrapnel landing on my back, and they were hot, and I remember tearing through my pants legs, and I thought I was hit. I didn't know how bad, but you know, when it stopped, fortunately there was just some hot iron on my back, and I had some tears through my pants legs, and my legs were bleeding, but there were surface wounds, you know, the cuts. But I remember that barrage, we lost a lot of men. The guys were screaming for medic, and the guys laying dead all around during that time. So that's one of the things I remember most. And also I remember the attack on the town where I got captured. And that was, I believe the name of the town was Fourren, F-O-U-R-E-N, I think it was pronounced, it was spelled. Anyway, at that time, I was a runner, and so I stayed close to the lieutenant. I was his runner, and I remember a lot of arguing about going into the town. The town was at the bottom of a hill. We were on the top of the hill, and we were supposed to go down into the town. We're waiting for tanks to escort us. And I remember an argument between the tank commander. There were 3 tanks, tank commander and the lieutenant. And the tank commander insisted that the infantry go in before the tanks. And the lieutenant was insisting that the infantry go behind the tanks for protection because we had to go down an open field to get to the town. And somewhere I heard there were Patton's tanks, and they were saying that Patton believed that a tank was worth 100 men, so he wanted the men to go in before the tanks. So they argued for a while, and finally, they were in touch, by telephone with their commanders, and finally, it was resolved that we would go in behind the tanks, and the tanks would not go into the town. The tanks would stop at the edge of town and then go back, because they didn't want to lose tanks. So that's what happened. We went in behind the tanks, went into town. Germans, there was no shelling in the town, which made us believe that the Germans were going to put up a fight, because usually if the Germans withdrew, they would shell us as we came into town. But because there was no shelling, we figured they were in there. And sure enough, the Germans were in town, and we had to flush them out building by building, which we did. And they retreated, and they took off, and I was with lieutenant and a sergeant. There were 7 of us. We went to the forest end of town and into a basement, and the lieutenant was going to set up his headquarters in the basement. And that's where I got hit. I got a leg wound. What happened was there was one house where we threw a couple of grenades in and flushed out a whole bunch of Germans. One of them was an officer. And we all looked to capture officers, because officers had the good stuff on them. I mean, they had the daggers, they had the Lugers, some of them had the medals, all the souvenirs. So anyway, I had seen this officer come out with his hands up, and I ran over to him to grab him. And sure enough, I got a Luger from him, and then a buddy of mine came running up, and he looked so unhappy because I got to this guy first, because the prized possession was a Luger, a German Luger. But what happened was I was searching this German officer, and I found the diamond brooch in his pocket, which I lifted from him, and I put in my pocket. I gave this buddy of mine, I gave him the Luger, and he was thrilled to death. He didn't know what I had taken the brooch, but I figured it was a good trade-off. So he took off, and then the lieutenant was hollering for me to catch up with him, because he was going toward this house at the end of town. So I started toward him, and all of a sudden I got hit. It felt like a rock had hit me in the leg, knocked me off my feet, and it burned, and I went down, but I just felt a burning sensation in my ankle. So it was like a bullet had hit and knocked a rock and whacked it into my foot. That's all I thought it was. Anyway, I got to this place where they were going to establish the headquarters in the basement, and I looked down, and my leg was all bloody, and we set up headquarters there. There was 7 of us there, and there was a wood stove, I remember, and the lieutenant said, let's make a fire and have something to eat and relax. And I got a little nervous, and I said, Tim, shouldn't we be waiting for a counterattack? Because this town, I heard, had changed hands 2 or 3 times. So he says, no, you don't have to worry about that. He said, heavy weapons is coming in. They're going to set up a perimeter around the town, and then we don't expect another attack for at least a couple of hours, so you can relax and take it easy. And you don't have to worry anything to worry about. And then he looked down at my leg, and he looked at it, and he saw it looked like a bullet had gone right through my ankle, which it did. It didn't hit a bone, but it went through. It was a flesh wound. And so he said, geez, you better take care of that ankle. And he no sooner said that when all of a sudden we heard, come out, roust. And we looked up, and out of the basement window, there's a German standing there with a grenade. And at the entrance to the basement is another German there standing there with another grenade. So we grabbed our rifles, and the lieutenant said, no, you better not. He said, one grenade, there's no other way out. There was only one way out of the cellar. And he said, one grenade will get all of us. You can't. Because we could have gotten the two of the Germans, we could see them. So anyway, that's when we were taken prisoners. So we filed out one at a time with our hands up, and we learned later that it was a German patrol that actually was sent in to take prisoners for information. If it hadn't been, we would have been dead, because all they had to do was drop a grenade and keep going. So anyway, they were sent in to take prisoners, and they did. And so they marched us back, and while we were being marched back, and with our hands up, finally the guy, I guess it was a German sergeant, said, it's okay, you can put your hands down. Put your hands down. And then we put our hands down. I put my hand in my pocket. I had this diamond brooch, and I'm figuring if when they interrogate us, if they see this brooch, they're going to figure I killed the lieutenant, the officer, and it was not going to go. So I dropped the brooch on the side of the road in the mud. Then I had my dog tags, and it said Hebrew, had an H on it, and I'm Jewish. So I figured I'd better get rid of that too. So I unclipped the dog tags, and I dropped them also on the side of the road, and kept going. We went through, it was a barracks of Germans, and they took us to a farmhouse where there was a German officer who was going to interrogate us. And I remember he was upstairs. It must have been an old hayloft. And one at a time, they took us upstairs to interrogate us. And this guy, I don't know what his rank was, but he spoke perfect English, hardly any accent. And we went up one at a time, and when I went up there, he was very friendly. He reached out his hand, he shook my hand, and he said, you can relax, you don't have to worry now, the war's over for you. He said, make yourself comfortable. He gave me a chair, sit down. He says, you're from New York. I lived in New York. He said, I lived in New York for 10 years. I was in the geopolitics on the employ of the German government. He said he lived on Riverside Drive overlooking the George Washington Bridge. And he was very friendly. Then he started asking me questions. He said, who was the tank commander? I didn't know. He said, who was your commanding general? I really didn't know. He says, who was your battalion commander? I really didn't know any of these things. So I said, I don't know. So he was getting angrier and angrier and angrier. So finally he got so mad he started screaming at me in German, which I didn't understand. And he had a Luger on his table, the little desk on the table, and he picked up the Luger and he came after me with the gun. And I thought for sure he was going to kill me. But instead, he just waved it in the air. He fired a shot in the air, and he backed me to the door and pushed me down a flight of stairs. So I rolled down the flight of stairs at the bottom. I really didn't get hurt or anything. But I was very relieved that, I was still alive. And I joined the others. And the lieutenant, they took somewhere else. I guess he went to a different POW camp, for officers' camp. And the 6 of us, they marched us up into Germany. It's a long story. I don't know how much time you want to take with this.
Take as much time as you want.
Well, the other thing that happened was I had a watch. They stripped us of all jewelry, rings, watches, everything. But when they searched us, I raised my hands and I had a watch that slipped down from my wrist to my arm, and they didn't see it. So when they weren't looking, I took the band. It may not be important, it was important to me. I took the band off the watch, took the watch, I made a slit in the lining of my pants right behind my belt buckle, and I put the watch, slipped it in there, and I was able to keep that watch all the time that I was a prisoner. And it was important to me because my mother had given me the watch as a going-away present, so that's today. But going into Germany, they marched us into Germany, joined another group, and I kept joining groups of prisoners until there was a long line of prisoners, and they were marching us at night along a road. We didn't march during the day because the American planes were strafing us, so they marched us at night. So I was marching along with some guy, I remember he was from Jersey, and we were talking and saying that if we kept going in, the farther we got into Germany, the harder it was going to be to get away. So we're talking about taking off and getting away. And so I decided that it's a country road, and a very windy country road. And they had one guard every 20 or 30 feet. And I figured out that if we stood behind a guard and we had a curve in the road, the next guard would not be able to see us because we turned the curve and the other guy would be behind. So all we had to do was drop off into the brush, wait till the column passed, and then we could head back the other way. So that's what we did. The 2 of us did that. And what happened was I told him my plan, and he said it sounded good to him. So we decided to do that. Only I think he misunderstood what I was talking about, because when we dropped off into the brush, into the side of the road, instead of sitting there and waiting for the column to pass, he took off up a hill that led to a field. And I saw him running up, so I followed him. We ran up to the top of the hill, turned around to face each other, and our helmets clanged. It sounded like a church bell. And we thought for sure we were gonna, so we took off. At the top of this ridge was a field, and we took off running across the field. And nobody shot at us, nobody followed us, so we were okay. Later on, I was recaptured. And I found out that the guard saw us, and he aimed his rifle at us, but he waved us off, and he said, let him go. The guards, I think he was Polish, the guards were Russian and Polish, and they were old people that they had guarding us, so they didn't really care. So the 2 of us took off, went across the field, headed in the direction of the gunfire, American gunfire. We got caught in a shell barrage, American shells, and the shrapnel was horrible. It was one shell after another after another. We got down behind a couple of trees, and then I said to him, we have to run toward the guns to get under the parabola, because if we stay here, we're going to get hit with shrapnel. We have to go toward the guns, get under the parabola. So he said, okay. So I started running toward the guns, and he's not following me. So I looked, he was still there. I ran back down. I said, what's the matter? What's the matter? He says, I can't do it, I can't do it. And he panicked, and he starts screaming and crying, I can't do it, I can't do it. So I said, well, you go back. I didn't want to go back. I said, you go back. I had this leg wound, and I was afraid it's going to get infected, and I figured I got to get back to the lines. So anyway, he went back, and I kept going. And I went across fields. I didn't know where the hell I was going. I was going toward the American gunfire, and picking up along the way, I was picking up turnips and potatoes in the field and all kinds of vegetables from the farmlands and put in my pocket. And finally, this was at night. It was getting daybreak. I saw a farmhouse, and it was a barn. Went to the barn. It's a pile of hay. I dug myself into the hay, into the pile of hay, to spend the day. I don't think I was sleeping there very long when all of a sudden I hear a commotion, and I wake up, and there's a bunch of women chatting, making noise, and a German with a rifle and a bayonet. Apparently what happened was that a woman came in to feed the cows and took the hay and uncovered me. And I was still sleeping. She ran out to call the Germans. So she called the German, came, and he brought me to his headquarters. Turned out that it was like bedlam. I mean, the Germans were burning papers, they were packing up, the Americans were advancing, and they were getting ready. They couldn't care less about me, so they're getting ready to leave. So all they did was to tell him to bring me to another place where there were other American POWs to join the POWs. And that was the first time. I escaped 3 times. So again, I went in with a group of POWs, and we marched. This time they took us to a labor camp. And the labor camp was it was a farming community, and we were housed in the attic of a one-room schoolhouse. And we slept on the floor. It was covered with hay. It was my first experience with lice. When we woke up in the morning, covered with lice. Anyway, the labor was we were slicing logs and chopping the log slices into chips. And they used the chips to run trucks. You familiar with that? I'd never seen that before. Anyway, they had a big tank on either side of the truck, and they would feed the wood chips, and they'd make some kind of a fuel out of that would run the trucks. So our job was to cut the wood and make the chips for the trucks. And that's what we did every day. We got up in the morning, and they took us out to the town, and we would cut the logs and make the chips, and they fed us 1 bowl of soup and 2 slices of bread every day. That was the ration. The soup was a watery soup, and the bread was not bad, but 2 slices was not enough. We were all starving. I mean, it was very painful. I know I'd wake up in the middle of the night in pain because of the hunger. It was very bad. One time, I mean, talk about bright moments. One time I was chopping my chips, and all of a sudden I hear somebody hissing at me from one of the buildings. And I turn around, there's a woman standing at the door, and she's waving for me to come over. So I go over to her, she grabbed me, pulled me in. I guess when I was about 18 or 19 at the time, I looked like I was 12. She grabbed me, pulled me in, gave me a bowl of potatoes and meat and stuff, and pushed me in a closet to eat it. So I gobbled it down, and she left the closet door a little bit open so there's enough light in there. I gobbled it down and gave her the bowl. She grabbed me by the arm, went out to the door, made sure no guards were watching, and then she pushed me out to go back. So I made a kind gesture. Do you want to What I'm doing, I'm going through my experiences, as a prisoner of war, Anyway, I was in that labor camp, I think, for about a month. And then, of course, the Americans were advancing. They continued to advance. And so we were being marched back. And again, I had this plan, as long as we're being marched out at night, I'm going to try to get out again. And sure enough, I was walking with a guy. It's funny, I never remember any of these guys' names, but I remember where they were from. He was from Texas, and he was tall, and we were talking. Again, I told him about getting away the same way I did before, and that is to get behind a guard, and as we got around a curve, we duck into the brush. And so we did that, and again, we got away and started back, heading toward the American lines, toward the sound of American gunfire. And we were getting pretty close, but again, it was getting daylight, and so we approached the town, and there was, actually it was a bombed out town. It was a community. It looked like there were expensive homes, but they were all rubble. And we went into one of these homes. Each home was surrounded by a gate, and this gate had a wire around it. It's funny, the gate was intact, but the house itself was just rubble. We went in, and we managed to get into the basement of this house, where we were going to go to sleep for the day and then continue our journey at night. And again, it must have been asleep an hour or 2 hours. All of a sudden, we're being prodded again with a bayonet. Turns out that the owner of this house would come to look at it every day or so to look at his rubble, and he noticed the wire off the gate. We didn't put the wire back on the gate, so the gate was open. So he went and he found us. He went back into town, and he got what they call the Volksstrom. It was like a people's army, and they were all older Germans with World War I uniforms. They had pointed helmets. They had rifles from World War I, and they came in. There must have been a half a dozen of them, and they prodded us with the bayonets. We tried to explain to them that we were lost, that we were Americans, we were prisoners of war, we're trying to find our way back to the organization. We got separated and so on and so forth, but they were very angry. They were pointing out the rubble, and they said, this is what the Americans did. They ruined our homes, they killed our people, and they were being bombed. So they paraded us into town, and from what we gathered, they were going to shoot us as spies. They took us to a courtyard, and they were going to put us against the wall, and actually the townspeople joined them when we were being paraded through town. I understood a little German by that time, not much, but I understood him telling that we caught 2 spies and we were going to execute them. And then a German officer happened to be walking by, and he asked what was going on. And they said that we caught these 2 American spies, we're going to shoot them. And he said, oh, wait, you can't do that, we have to interrogate them. He says, so he said, they'll have to come with me, we have to take them to our headquarters and interrogate them. So they were disappointed, but he congratulated them, for capturing us. And then as we walked away, he said, he spoke English, this officer. He says, you guys are very lucky. These guys, it's a very crazy group of people you got here. So if I hadn't come by, they would have shot you. So anyway, again, they took us back to headquarters. It was a dugout in a kind of a trench, and we can hear rifle fire, and we knew the Americans were not very far. But again, we went back to another captured group of Americans and joined them, and they took us, there must have been about 100 of us this time. We didn't know where we were going. turned out we were going to a Stalag at this time. What they did, and also at this time, my leg was really sore. It turned out I was getting gangrenous. I was swelled, I had a swelling under my arm and a swelling in my groin, which the doctors told me later was infection. So anyway, they led us. I didn't have to walk very far. They led us to boxcars, the 40 and 8s, boxcars. And they crowded us in to these boxcars, and we were going to be taken to a Stalag. We were packed in so tight that you couldn't sit. You had to stand. And guys were passing out. There was no water, and it was hot. And anyway, we didn't travel very far when all of a sudden we were being strafed by American planes. And the bullets are coming right through the boxcars. 50 caliber bullets, just rip you apart. Two guys in and the boxcar I was in, 2 guys were hit with 50 calibers. And so we tried to open the doors, couldn't open the doors. They were locked from the outside. Finally, the train screeched to a halt. The doors opened. We all poured out. It turned out that a couple of American, I don't know if they were officers or just supervisors, talked the Germans into letting us get out and forming like a POW letters with our bodies to indicate to the planes that we were American POWs. And that's what we did. We all took our shirts off, and we lined up and bent over, holding each other's hips, and we formed the letters P-O-W in a field. And these were P-47s that were strafing us. And they came down, and they saw it, they tipped their wings, and they left. And actually, there was a picture of this in Stars and Stripes later on. I had seen it, this incident. Anyway, then we got back into the boxcars, and the wounded were all moved to the last boxcar, and we went into Stalag. It was in Limburg, Germany. Stalag, I think it was 12A. Stalag 12A. My throat is very dry. Can I get some water or something? All right, so we went to Stalag 12A in Limburg, the whole group of us, and they distributed us amongst the barracks. And this is a place where they were surrounded by barbed wire, and they had Germans with dogs, the German Shepherd dogs running around. And I don't know how long I was in that camp, maybe a few weeks, but in that camp, that was like you see in the movies, the Stalags, and except it was right alongside of railroad yards, and maybe not every day, but every few days, the American planes would come over and they would strafe and bomb the tracks and the railroad. It was like a railroad terminal. And the American POWs were sent out to repair the tracks. And the Germans would be in little dugouts with their rifles trained on them. And we lost a lot of American POWs. The POWs were being killed a lot. I never got that detail, fortunately, but we lost a lot of men there working in the... And there again, at night, if you caught outside of the barrack after 9 o'clock, you were shot. The dogs were let loose at night. The barracks were the 3 tiers. It looked something like what you see that the Holocaust survivors went through, with giant barracks lined up with triple bunk beds. We slept on straw. There were several buckets in the corner of the room that we used as toilets. You couldn't go out at night. And again, we had 1 bowl of soup and 2 slices of bread a day. That was the daily ration. But fortunately, I don't think I was there more than a couple of weeks, or maybe 3 weeks, when, again, the Americans were advancing and they started moving us out. So again, we went out marching north on these roads, and again, at this time I was limping badly and my leg was really getting bad. And I decided I had to do it again. I had to try make another attempt and get away. And I did the same. This time I went alone. I didn't. The first 2 times had partners. This time I told the guy next to me, and I said, I told him what I was going to do, and he said, well, go ahead, good luck. And again, I dropped off on the side of the road, and the line continued. It was a long line. It must have been 20, 30 minutes before they all passed me. And then I got up and I start walking the other way. And I'm walking south, but this time no gunfire, and I was pretty far from American lines. I knew that, but I figured if I could find a place to hide, I could just wait it out and wait until the Americans caught up with me. The light's blinking. Does that mean anything?
5 minutes. Let me just
9 January 2000.
So I was at the side of the road, and the sun was starting to come up, and I'm walking back, and I see a town. And at the same time that I see it was a small, like, farming town, but these were stone buildings. I mean, they were not farmhouses. And I must have been at least 100 yards from the town when I saw somebody standing there. And as I saw him, he saw me, and he started pointing in my direction. Then I stood still. And then he called somebody else over, and the 2 men, who I think were soldiers, were pointing in my direction. So I didn't know what to do. I just stayed there, and I sat down. I waited and waited, and I didn't know which way to go. But finally I decided I might as well take a chance. So I went toward the town, and I didn't see any activity, nothing, not a dog, not a chicken, not a cat, nothing. It was quiet. I went to this house, the first house I came to. The door was open. I opened the door and I went in, and it was like a 2-story building. And there were a stairway going up on my right, and then in front of me was another door that looked like it might have gone into a basement. So I tried the door, and it was locked. But just then, somebody on the upper landing started asking, "Who are you? How are you?" As a woman came out asking who I was. And I said, she said, Ruski, Polski, didn't know. I guess I was unidentifiable because I didn't look like I had a uniform on anymore. I was just rags. And so I said I was an American, and I was looking for a place to sleep. And I was lost, and I was looking for a place to sleep. So several other people came out, and they had a conversation in German. She came down the stairs. She opened the door with a key, pushed me in, and I went down a couple of steps, and it was a basement. And in the basement were a couple of bed springs, no mattress, bed springs. Anyway, I was feverish at that time, so I just laid down on the bed spring and I fell asleep. And next thing I know is the same door opened, and a woman came in, and she greeted me like she was so happy to see me, and she brought me upstairs, welcomed me, gave me a bowl of food, gave me a shower, and welcomed me like I was a long-lost relative. So I figured the Americans must be close by. Otherwise, she wouldn't be acting like that. But there was no Americans there. I found out later that there was an advanced armored vehicle came by under the window, and she saw it. So apparently she locked me in the basement, keeping me there for the Americans if they came, or the Germans if they came. So, either way, I would be bartered. I also found out that the 2 guys pointing in my direction were SS men, that the building was a 1-room schoolhouse that was headquarters for the SS, and they had moved out just an hour before they had taken off. So if I had gotten there an hour earlier, I'm sure they would have shot me. I mean, the SS, they don't fool around. So that was really the end of the story, in the sense that I was there about 3 days. They fed me well, they treated me well, and the Americans finally came by, and I went down, I spoke to the commander, who was a captain, and he signed a jeep to take me back to an aid station. And from there, I went back to the American lines. And that's my experience as a prisoner of war. But one more interesting thing that I can tell you was where I was at the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, the 4th Infantry Division, when we got out of Hurtgen Forest, we went to a town for rest and rehabilitation, a town called Echternach, 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 which was like a resort town, and it was on the Moselle River. And we were there because we were really in shatters. I mean, when we got there, they told us that we would be there for several weeks. They took most of our weapons. They gave us fresh clothing. We gave us back pay. And we were in houses. We had showers. We had hot food. And we were supposed to be there for a few weeks. Now, this was early in December. The Bulge, if you remember, is December 16th. We had an outpost on the top of a hill overlooking the other side of the river where the Germans were. Everything had been quiet for months. The only thing that has occasional shell back and forth. But there had been no fighting along that river, and that's why they sent us there. So they took most of our weapons. We were very happy. It was my turn for outpost duty on top of this hill where we overlooked the Germans. We had a little dugout up there, and there were 3 of us assigned, take turns. I think there were 4-hour shifts that we would watch with glasses, binoculars, to see what the Germans were doing. So we did. I was up there December 15th, and I woke up, I remember it was just about dawn, and I was ready to take my shift. I opened a box of K rations. I remember I was just having a can of, I think it was bacon and cheese for breakfast. And the guy who I was relieving, they always call me Red. I don't know why, but they call me Red. Come here, quick. Take a look at this. This was dawn. It was very cloudy. Took a look. Thousands and thousands of Germans coming across this river, Moselle River. They must have put in bridges, floating bridges overnight. They were coming across in tanks. They were coming across afoot. And there was this flooding. Anyway, we called down we had a telephone to call down, and at the same time we're hearing rifle fire. So we called down, they told us that the exact words were, "We're up to our ass in krauts down here, and our guys are getting hit all over the place." He said, "You better get out of there while you can, and don't come down here, get going." So that's what we started to do that, but then we saw some guys coming up toward us. Turned out they were Americans, and they were medics, and they had a stretcher, and they're carrying, actually it was a lieutenant who was wounded, and they brought him up and put him in we had like a dugout, and so we asked if we could be any help, and they said, "No, you better get out of here." They went back to get some more of the wounded, and we took off. And from that point on, I mean, we were dodging Germans all the way through. Fortunately, we were on the western edge of the Bulge, and we kept running into Germans and running away from Germans, and finally, I don't know how we did it, we got to Liège, Belgium, and that's where there were a few of us ended up in Liège for a few days. Our men were scattered all over the place. We couldn't find anybody who knew where we were supposed to be. So we spent like 3 days in Liège. I went to see a movie in Liège. I saw Custer's Last Stand in French with German subtitles. This is in Belgium. And finally, we just got bored. Finally, we found an officer who was gathering up men because they were expecting a German attack at the edge of Liège, in Belgium. And we joined them, and this was Christmas Eve. I'll never forget this. Christmas Eve, we were in foxholes about 50 feet apart. There were hardly any of us. And we expected a major German attack and at dawn. So I didn't think we were going to make it. None of us thought we were going to make it. Just not enough of us. Anyway, at dawn, what we saw was one of the greatest fireworks displays I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the Americans were shelling the edge of a wooded area. We were in the edge of a wooded area. There was a field, and then another wooded area. And the Germans were in that wooded area. They were going to come across the field at us. Americans shelled the woods. It was a spectacular display of shelling. And then, all of a sudden, it must have been thousands of Germans came running across this field toward us. So we started firing at the Germans, but we knew we were going to be overrun. But all of a sudden, from behind us, there was a fresh American troops came running through us. And it was we called it a Bucket of Blood Division. I think it was Pennsylvania, shaped like the state of Pennsylvania.
28th Division.
28th?
28th.
Yeah. I didn't know. We called it the Bucket of Blood.
Because of the patch.
Yeah, because it looked like a vase. Yeah. And they kept fresh troops. They came running through, and the Germans were just dropping like flies, and whoever was standing went running right back to the woods. It was the greatest thing I ever saw. And in fact, then a lieutenant came by and said, "Okay, you guys, come on back. You can leave now." They were rounding us up. But we just stood there and we cheered. I mean, we watched them and we just cheered. And that was an incident I'll never forget.
So after you came back to American lines after being a POW, how did you get back to the States?
I was in a hospital in Paris for several months. I had typhus from the louse. They call it louse fever. It was typhus. I had, what do you call that infection? Gangrene and malnutrition. And I was in the Paris hospital for a couple of months. I was there at the end of the war, when the VE Day, I was there. I was there on the day that Roosevelt died. I'll never forget that. That was April 10th. I was there on my birthday. It was April 4th. And then from there, they flew me to Halloran Hospital in Staten Island in New York. We went once. It was a 22-hour trip in those days, propeller plane. When we stopped at Greenland for refueling, and then Halloran Hospital. And I was in Halloran Hospital for about 7 months. So I was in a hospital a long time.
They fly you into Mitchell Field on Long Island and then over to Staten Island?
You know, I don't know. I don't remember what field. I don't remember where we landed. I know that I went from a hospital in Paris to a hospital in Staten Island, New York. And I know I was there for several months. And after that, it was uphill, or should I say downhill? I don't know. It was wonderful because they put me on limited duty. So I was a military policeman in Baltimore, Maryland. Before that, they gave me a 60-day furlough. They gave me a 2-week vacation in the Smoky Mountains of, where is that, North Carolina. They treated me like a king. They gave me the GI Bill of Rights, so I went back to college. I was able to live at home, so I had a car when nobody else had a car. After that, I was very well. I lived very well.
So what did you do after the war?
After the war, I went back to school. Well, for a while, I didn't want to go back to school. I wanted to work, so I went out and took a job as a salesman selling books from door to door. And I did well at that, but it was not a career. So anyway, I went back to Brooklyn College and finished my BA degree at Brooklyn College. I started off in engineering, and it wasn't for me, so I went into the social sciences, and I graduated with a major in sociology and a minor in psychology. And then I went to graduate school. I got a scholarship for Florida State University. So it was, I went there with a stipend and free tuition. And I was there for 2 years, and I got a master's degree in social work. And then I worked as a social worker in a state hospital. I worked with teenage drug addicts for about 7 years. I became a director of an outpatient facility for teenagers with the Jewish Board of Guardians. And then I went into analytic training at the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. And that was a 4-year training program in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. And I became a psychotherapist, and I worked privately as a psychotherapist for the last 30 years. And I retired last week.
Congratulations.
And that's why I'm going to Florida next week for 2 months.
Great.
To join all the older people in the sun.
Hey, you've had a very busy and successful life.
I
How
think
would
so.
you fit your World War II experiences into that life overall?
Well, it helped me. In retrospect, it really helped me. It put me through college. I feel that I grew up very quickly from being a teenager, and I was only 21 years old when I was discharged, but still I felt much more mature. So Army taught me how to get along with people and how to manage on my own. You know, when you're at home and your mother does your laundry and does your beds, you forget what it's like to live on your own. In the Army, you have to do your own bed, you have to take care of your own footlockers, you got to take care of your clothes, you got to take care of yourself. I think it's a maturing experience. For me, it was. For me, it was.
When you came back after the war and went to school, did you find that there was a difference between you and other veterans and other students?
Not really. Not really. It seemed like everybody was a veteran at that time. I mean, the people who were not veterans were very unusual. It was like people who didn't smoke in those days. Everybody smoked. If you didn't smoke, there's something, unusual. Almost everybody was veteran.
What were you thinking when you came back after the war and you're starting up college, and maybe, I don't know, perhaps you didn't think you'd ever be going to college before you went in the Army. I mean, how did you view your future at that point?
I wasn't sure. I was just so happy to be home and so happy to be out of the Army, really, and out of danger, and to be alive, that everything was exciting to me. I just felt good about everything.
You know, with all the training you had in sociology and psychology, you ever use that or look back from that perspective on your experiences in the Army? Has your later training given you any insights into your military experiences?
You mean use the experience to help me with my career and profession, or the other way around?
Or both?
I don't think so. I can't think of any way that I did.
Or maybe something that later on when you were trained in sociology and psychology, you could look back on something that happened to you and say, oh, that's why that happened, or that's why we were that way. Any insights come to you later in life?
Not really. The only The only way I can get close to that is that when I was in the Army, when I got out, I was in very good physical condition because in Brooklyn College, when I started school, I was gymnastic. I was on the gymnastic team, and I used to do high bar, and I did parallel bars, you know, and handstands and all that stuff. So I was in good physical condition, so that the basic training was easy for me. And I actually enjoyed basic training. It was a lot of fun. The calisthenics was fun. It was easy for me. I forgot what I was going to say. What was your question again?
Is there anything that came to you later on in life, an insight perhaps, based on your training in sociology and psychology, that you could look back and on your time during World War II and say, now I understand why that was that way, or why that happened?
Oh, no, now I remember what I was going to say. Yeah. The one thing that I didn't quite understand when it was happening was why I was volunteering for everything, why I was trying to make a hero out of myself. I mean, when we were in Hurtgen Forest and the BAR man got hit, I volunteered to carry the BAR. The BAR weighed as much as I did with the bandoliers of ammunition, and yet I volunteered. So I was always volunteering. Going on patrol, they needed somebody, I would volunteer. I didn't know, I thought I was just being here, but the gist of it was that I was Jewish, and there was anti-Semitism. And I was always afraid that people were going to tell me that, you know, that I was a coward, or that I was squeamish, or that I was reluctant to do anything because I was Jewish. So that's the only thing in retrospect I know that I try to prove myself as being, you know, as courageous and as strong and as good as anybody else.
Did you ever, were you ever subjected to anti-Semitism?
Oh,
in the
yeah.
military?
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, at times. I mean, people, I mean, there were other guys who would look at me and say, "Oh, lousy Jew." I mean, I didn't look Jewish, but my name was Jewish at the time. And I remember one time, you know, my name was changed from Silverstein till Sylvester after I was discharged. So when I was in the Army, it was Silverstein, which is Jewish. And I remember one time I was with a couple of guys who were walking down the street somewhere down south, and some woman came over and said, "Oh, would you gentlemen like to have dinner with us?" Because they wanted to entertain GIs. So we said, sure. So they invited us to her house, and we're sitting around a table, and there were about 8 or 10 of us, and this woman was there with her children. She had some teenage children, and then she asked us to introduce ourselves, her name. So I remember one of them, his name was LaRue, Jack LaRue, something like that. Another one gave his name, and then I said, my name is Martin Silverstein. And then she said, "What? Silverstein?" Oh, and she made a face, and I can almost feel a shudder around the room. And then one of her sons got up and threw his napkin down and walked out because of that. And I felt, you know, like I wanted to disappear. So I remember that incident. But so, you know, they were occasional, but they were there.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever feel let me rephrase this. When you took off the dog tags, because they said Hebrew,
Yeah.
you knew that the Nazis were doing things to Jews.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever feel a personal stake in fighting the Germans because of what they were doing with the Jews?
Oh, I did.
Did you have any family over there? Or?
No.
How did you feel fighting against Nazism, fighting for democracy, and being the recipient of anti-Semitism at the same time?
I didn't put the two together. I figured these guys who were anti-Semitic, and, you know, They were anti-black. They were anti-Puerto Rican. They were anti-everything. A lot of them were anti-Catholic if they were not Catholic. So, you know, I just thought it went with that territory that, you know, I mean, it was certainly unpleasant, but I didn't attribute it to the government or to the country. I attributed it to these guys who were like that. And most of the guys who were like that were pretty ignorant and uneducated.
Let's back up, if we can, to when you were in the Army Specialist Training Program. What did you think you were going to graduate as, or how did you, while you were in the program, what did you think your military future was going to be?
It was not clear. They never made it clear. They were educating us to be some kinds of technicians. There was talk of officers training, or at least non-commissioned officers training, but it was never clear as to why we were in that program.
Must have been a big shock to find out that suddenly you're an infantryman.
It was, but it was not just me. It was everybody, you know.
When you got to Europe and you were sent to the 4th Infantry Division as a replacement, how were you received by the other soldiers?
Welcome. They were very nice, very good to us.
Did you feel like you had a lot to learn in a short amount of time, or did they help show you the ropes?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Had your training prior to that prepared you for what you actually faced?
I thought it did. I mean, I knew the rifle very well. I knew the equipment that I had. When I picked up the BAR, I knew exactly how to use it and what it did. I thought I was very well prepared. What I was not prepared for was how to avoid getting killed. And the guys really helped with that. They showed us how to maneuver through the woods. They showed us how to maneuver through a field and you know, avoid, they very quickly learned the sound of an 88 shell and very quickly learned the sound of a German machine gun and American weapons. And then it was positive in that sense. The guys on the front line were very helpful and very nice.
Fighting in the Hurtgen forest must have required you to learn almost like a whole new set of tactics, as opposed to fighting in open land.
Yeah.
I mean, like your response to indirect fire, was that different in the forest than it was?
Well, only the fact that the trees were there to offer you some cover. Would you go from tree to tree? And you did learn that you were not very well protected. Even in a foxhole, you were not very well protected from tree blasts, you know, mortars coming in, or even the 88s when they hit a tree and you get a tree burst. There's not much you can do. I mean, some guys, they would dig the foxhole and put logs across and slide under the logs.
You must have been rather confused fighting in the forest. I mean, did you know where the Germans were at all times?
You can hear where the fire was coming from, sure.
Could you see them?
Not always. Sometimes you see shadows moving around and you fire at the shadows. It was hard to hit them. But in the forest, you can tell where the fire is coming from, but you couldn't see anybody really. Most of the time you're just firing blind. You're just returning fire. I mean, you saw a blast of fire coming toward you, you just fire back the same spot. And the other thing you learned was not to stay in the same spot for more than 1 minute. You keep moving.
Do you ever have the feeling of that possibly it wasn't the objectives you were fighting for, the localities like the Hurtgen Forest, weren't worth fighting for? Or why were we here?
Had no idea of where I was or why I was fighting and where I was fighting. I had no idea, but all I knew was that they'd tell me to go here and I'd go there and they say, shoot, you know, do this, do that. I didn't know who the commanders were. I knew my lieutenant and I knew my sergeant.
So your war was actually a very tightly focused one.
Yeah.
What about the relationships between the men? Were you tight with each other?
Yeah, very friendly.
Keep up with any of them today?
No. As I say, I don't remember any of the names except this guy LaRue, and I remember one guy that I knew, his last name was Sciascia, Sciascia, and the only reason I remember that name is because we were once in I think it was in a train station going somewhere, and somebody announced over the loudspeaker, Dick Sciascia, please come to the office. And he says, oh, that's my mother. I said, how do you know it's your mother? She's the only one who pronounces my name like why everybody else calls me Sciascia. It was an Italian name, and the correct pronunciation was Sciascia. And he said, only my mother would know that.
You were brushed with death very closely several times.
Several times. Yeah.
What did that do for your sense of mortality?
Just that you don't know one day to the next. We all had this saying that if it's got your name on it, it's going to get you. And you never know. It was just luck and chance. I mean, some guys, a bullet would bounce off a rock and hit him in the head. There's one guy, he took a bullet in the shoulder blade, shoulder bone. It hit the bone, and it ricocheted down into his lung and killed him. You never know. You never know. So we had that kind of philosophy that you don't know if you're going to be here today or tomorrow, and whatever happens, happens.
Was it easier to deal with everything once you came to a decision like that? Whatever happens, happens?
Yeah.
Why did you continue to try to escape so many times?
I think most of it was my leg, the leg wound. And the other thing I didn't know, I figured the farther I got into Germany, the harder it would be to get back. And the Americans were advancing. And all I had to do was get into a position where I can sit still and let them catch up to me. And I figured if I could do that, I can get back.
Was there ever a time when you were pre-POW that you despaired of being able to get back, or that you thought you might not make it?
Yeah, I was getting toward the end, just before the last time I escaped. My leg was bad. I was feverish. I didn't know that I had gangrene. I didn't know what was wrong with me. But I knew that I was feeling very weak, and I didn't know how much longer. I knew that my leg was infected. I didn't know how much longer I could last.
So how cold was it in the Battle of the Bulge?
Cold?
Mm-hmm.
Very cold. Very cold.
Have you ever been that cold again in your life?
I don't think so. But actually, it's interesting that even though it was very cold, you get used to the cold. And those woolen blankets were a godsend, because even if the woolen blanket was wet, if you wrapped yourself in a woolen wet blanket, you were warm. And we were always in wet ground, always in wet ground. But, there was a lot of trench feet, but other than that, there was no frostbite or anything like that.
You mentioned that you remember being in the hospital on the day FDR died. Why did that day stand out so much in your mind?
Oh, I loved FDR. He was like a father figure to me,
How so?
And the whole country was sad. Everybody was sad when that happened, There was like a gloom setting over the entire hospital. It's as though no one expected it. But I grew up with FDR.
Was he the only president you ever knew? Was he the only president you ever knew?
I ever knew? You mean at that time?
Yeah.
I guess so.
I mean, when you were young, you didn't remember Hoover, did you?
I remember him running against Hoover. I remember the ads on the radio, I don't remember Hoover as a president, but I remember him running, I remember the election. And FDR, was he 3 terms? I think.
4.
4 times, so, yeah, so he was the only president I ever knew at the time.
So he was
Yeah.
like, he wasn't just the president in some way.
Yeah.
Well, when you look back on it all, was it worth it?
I would not have chosen it. I mean, I'm not unhappy about it. I think in strange ways it was good for me. I don't know what would have happened if I never had the experience. You know, I probably would have stayed in Brooklyn College and done the same thing that I did. But as I said, I think it was a maturing experience. Just the training, I mean, and the combat experience, I mean, it helped me. It helped me.
Did you feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself? Were you a part of something bigger than yourself, or do you feel like you contributed to something?
Not really. No. 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 It's the saddest thing about it is my brother was killed at Hurtgen Forest, and he was shot in the head about the same time that I was there. I didn't know it at the time. I learned about that when I was in a hospital in Paris. He was 2 years older than I am, and he was killed. So I lost a brother, and you know, it was really hard on my family. Very hard, especially they got 2 telegrams, one that he was killed in action, I was missing in action, within a week of each other.
It must have been very hard.
Yeah.
Why did you volunteer to come talk to us?
You know, it was like serendipitous in the sense that I have a house in East Hampton, a summer place that I go to weekends, and I have a son who is also out there, and he's reading the local paper, The Star, and he says, "Hey, Dad," he said, "they're looking for people from World War II to interview." I said, "They are?" He says, "Yeah, why don't you give them a call?" And he's become interested in my experiences now that he's 40 years old. And, you know, all this business with the movies and Stephen Ambrose books, you know. And, so I said, "Yeah, I'll give him a call." "Okay, I'll give him a call." So I gave him a call. And next thing you know, I had this application. I figured, why not? Why not? I know we're dying out very quickly. At the rate of 1,500 a day, I understand. And the state was good enough to send me a medal.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, not that I could think of. Actually, I am writing up these experiences as I remember them, because my son asked me to do that.
We'd love to have a copy.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
Just give me an address and...
Sure. Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
4 minutes.
It's flickering on and off again. That's all right?
That's the reason we're coming towards the end of the tape.
I'm
So,
sorry?
We're almost at the end of the tape.
Yeah.
So one last opportunity if there was anything else that you wanted to add or, you know, put into the record.
Not that I can think of at the moment, no. Not that I can think of.
Well, thank you very much.